Please welcome Amanda Marcotte for a talk on how feminism makes better skeptics.
All right, I'm going to try and leave some time at the end of this for questions, but it's a little long, so we'll see. So I basically came here today to talk to you about how feminism makes for better skeptics. I think that that's something I've kind of came into skepticism after I became a big feminist, so that's sort of the view I come at this from. And I really kind of want to talk about the overlap, I think, that I really see between secularism, skepticism, and feminism, and why I think they are kind of a perfect fit for each other. Skeptics love challenging popular beliefs. Religion, superstition, pseudoscience, supernatural claims, bad history, magical thinking, we get off on it, right? And I think what a lot of people sometimes fail to see is that sexism is probably one of the longest standing popular beliefs that needs to be challenged. In fact, I would say all of human history is basically sexist. It's like religion, it's thousands and thousands of years of bullshit just sort of piling on top of it on each other. And, you know, standing up to patriarchy, standing up to sexism is not easy, and it does not make you popular. I have definitely found that to be true. Anti-secularists, like religious people in this country, this sort of and I don't want to just say religious, but like the kind of people that want to make religion part of our government, that want to impose their faith through law on everybody else, are so obsessed with gender. In fact, I would say that's more important to them than any other issue. They basically want to protect straight male privilege. They spend all their time passing laws about abortion and contraception and gay, and they try to ban gay marriage. Everything's about sexuality, everything's about gender. School prayer and things, those are important to them. But like in terms of the amount of time that the theocrats of our country spend on different issues, I would say 90% of it is gender related. The other 10% are things like trying to get evolution in schools and whatnot. I had a video, but I don't really think I have time to show it because it's a long one, but it's a recent Rachel Maddow clip where she actually kind of talked about American theocracy. And what struck me about it was she did 10 entire minutes on the concept that there's all these right-wing theocrats trying to take over our government, trying to make their religious beliefs the law. And almost out of all the examples that she gave, only one was not about gender or sexuality. Only one. I mean, I think that really kind of drives home what we're up against and what they care about and what we really have to think about. Feminism and secular humanism have a very, very, very long history of being tied together. Feminism was an idea that really kind of came out of the Enlightenment, and there's going to be other speakers who speak about this in way more depth, so I'm just going to kind of have a couple of examples here. You have Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote probably one of the original feminist texts, The Vindication of Rights of Women. The Declaration of Sentiments at Seneca Falls was the meeting. The Seneca Falls was the meeting that kicked off the feminist movement in the United States, and they deliberately copied the language from the Declaration of Independence, which again was built on a secular humanist Enlightenment kind of ideology. So you can kind of read that for a minute and sort of see how they tweaked the Declaration of Independence to better suit what they thought it should say. And this was an interesting document too. They made a list of demands in this document that basically said, you know, they took it as a given that women were equal to men and that hundreds of and thousands of years of men taking women's identity away by not letting them inherit property, by making them civil non-persons when they got married, by not letting them work, by not letting them kind of control their lives, that was a violation of human rights. I mean, I think all that seems obvious to us now, but in 1848 it was not. In sort of the late 19th century, you start to actually see these kinds of ideas become much more atheist. So you see a lot of feminists in history that are also atheists. This isn't something feminists talk about enough, in my opinion. I think it's incredibly important. So these are some of my favorite atheist or anti-theist feminists. Simone de Beauvoir wrote The Second Sex, is a book I think everybody who's an atheist feminist should read. She really kind of spells out a very interesting and good theory about how without sort of that, like an existentialist theory of feminism, without a kind of God, like what women's lives are like and how women deserve to have the same sort of rights to transcendence as men. So anyway, I won't bore you with a lot of philosophy talk. What I do want to talk about, however, is the way that rationalism and evidence-based thinking has led policymakers around the world to kind of come around to feminism. This is one of the things that's one of the most recent developments, I think, in kind of international law and policy. It's really fascinating. Basically, studies after study, policy-oriented study after study, at like how to make people's lives around the world better, keep coming to the same conclusion, that feminists were right all along. That the best way to improve people's health, welfare, well-being, everything, is to embrace feminist ideals. And because of that, the United Nations has set they have a bunch of Millennium Development Goals that they want for the entire world, but they've set a separate set aside for just women. And if you can't read these, really quick, it's eradicate poverty and hunger, achieve universal primary education, promote gender equality and empower women, reduce child mortality, improve maternal health, combat HIV/AIDS, malaria and other diseases, ensure environmental sustainability, and global partnership for development. Now, some of these may not automatically seem like they're feminist goals, but I've decided to kind of look at 3 to sort of show why they are. The first one is that we want to look at really quickly is feminism and the environment. The United Nations and other policymakers who have looked at what we need to sort of create a sustainable environment, particularly to combat global warming, over and over again come to the same conclusion, which is we need to stop overpopulation, and the best way to do that is to empower women to choose how many children they have for themselves. Over and over again, we find that if women are given the tools and the rights to choose how many children they have many fewer children, often many fewer children than they otherwise have. We don't need to use force. We don't even need to think about these sorts of things because women just sort of tend to make the choices that are best for their environment themselves. I want to recommend, the LA Times had a really great article last year called Beyond 7 Billion that talked about these issues. It was Kenneth Weiss and photojournalist Rick Loomis. They went around the world to sort of interview people about overpopulation and what they thought about it, just ordinary people. And over again, what they found was the biggest problem was that women's rights weren't being respected around the world. And when they are respected, things get better. Now, this particular couple only wanted to have 2 children, but they live in the Philippines, which is a very Catholic country, and their local mayor banned family planning clinics basically banned family planning clinics, government funding of contraception. And she now has 8 children. She only wanted 2. So who's to blame? Yeah. I think you can sort of see where secular humanism, environmentalism, and feminism have an intersection here. The number one obstacle to the goal of fighting overpopulation, I would argue, is the Catholic Church, because they fight us. In fact, if you go to Catholic websites that denounce contraception, you'll find over and over again they deny that overpopulation is even a problem. They just get into all sorts of pseudoscientific nonsense. Ending poverty. So again, we don't necessarily think of poverty as a women's issue, but in fact it is. According to the UN, women make up 70% of the women's poor. One of the reasons is that women's rights are not respected around the world. They want to work, they want to get education, they want to be able to like move about as freely as men, all the sorts of things that actually end up helping them make money that they bring home and lift their families out of poverty. But unfortunately, that's something that a lot of women don't have. Who's to blame? Religion. Always. I mean, it's always religion, particularly in a lot of Muslim countries. You see women want to get educated, you see women want to work, and unfortunately, even if they're allowed to get educated and even if they're allowed to work, sometimes the restraints on their movements make it difficult for them to get full employment. This is, I'm going to mutilate her name, Malala Yousafzai, thank you. And I'm sure you all know her story. She was on a school bus trying to go to school and got shot by the Taliban. These are the sorts of issues that women are facing, and it leads to worsened poverty. Healthcare around the world. Healthcare is a really complex issue. There's a lot of diseases like cancer, heart disease that obviously are not about gender, sexuality, but some of the easiest diseases for us to prevent at this time, the cheapest, easiest diseases for us to prevent, go right back to feminist concerns and feminist issues, particularly maternal mortality, infant mortality, and AIDS. These sorts of things can be fixed with very simple interventions like condoms, sex education, contraception access, legal abortion, safe abortion, and like birthing kits, which only cost a couple dollars a piece, and midwife training. But we are stopped at every turn by religious fanatics. In this particular country, for instance, there's an ongoing struggle over family planning funding for international family planning funding. Right now we have the Obama administration, which is a way more secular humanist one, but we will get back to that, than the Bush administration. So we are funding contraception overseas, but under the Bush administration, that was brought to an end at the behest of fundamentalist Christians, not even Catholics, Protestant fundamentalist Christians who thought that it was encouraging sex outside marriage. So, skepticism and atheism. Without feminism, skepticism can, I think, and secular humanism can do a lot of good in the world. You can fight creationists. You can get the 10 Commandments and the Lord's Prayer off school walls. You can fight psychics and homeopaths, anti-vaccinationists, all sorts of stuff. But I hope just this sort of little scanning over the sort of views that feminists are working on with science around the world, I hope you understand that with feminism we can add so much more. We could add climate change. We can add fighting sexual repression around the globe. We can prevent illness and death from AIDS and childbirth deaths. We can fight poverty. We can fight sexual and domestic violence. And we can fight paranoia about fake geek girls, because I think this is an evidence-based claim. I know it's not as important as the rest of these, but it's kind of just as irritating. Feminism and religion are kind of mortal enemies, particularly fundamentalist religions. This is the Dugar family. They are quiverful family. They won't admit that. They won't admit that they are. They just sort of imply that they just like having a lot of kids, but in fact they're members of a very, very fringe religious cult called Quiverful that believes that you should have as many children as you can. And they are just the most extreme example of a way that women's lives are made smaller and sadder every day because of religion's undue influence on society. And it's women, I think, who stand to benefit the most from secular humanism, who are the ones who will have the most obstacles to their true equality removed if we at least get religion out of the public sphere and get its influence off our policy making. I mean, I'm certainly not going to say we're going to get rid of religion. I don't even know if that's like a reasonable goal, but we should certainly want to get religion out of policy making. So, and I'm going through this kind of quickly because I didn't want to leave time for questions, but I want to talk about a case study of science versus anti-feminism to just show you how much science and skepticism's goals are aligned with feminism. So this is Plan B one step. How many of you know what this is? Raise your hand. Okay, good. Plan B one step. It's emergency contraception. It's one specific brand of it. It is the one that this battle has been fought over for over a decade now. You take it after unprotected sexual intercourse. It prevents ovulation so that you don't get pregnant. It works a little bit over 70% of the time. Plan B was invented initially in France, but it's an Israeli drug. It's got a kind of weird history behind it. But for years, doctors have been giving women high doses of the birth control pill through prescription to prevent pregnancy after unprotected sex. So they went ahead and some pharmaceutical companies went ahead and started to actually make that a specific pill. And it was being sold with prescription for a long time. And then, well, actually not that long, since like the late 90s. And research showed that it was really, really safe. Safer than Tylenol, safer than aspirin, safer than a whole bunch of drugs. So in 2003, a FDA panel recommended that it be sold over the counter without any restrictions. And the Bush FDA rejected this application, even though the panel said that the drug was safe. And the reason they did was strictly religious and also kind of crazy right-wing paranoia. It was discovered that the FDA Deputy's Operations Commissioner, who was one of the Bush administration, completely filled the FDA with every time there was a new job slot, they put a religious right fundamentalist Christian in it over and over and over again. And Janet Woodcock was one of them. And she did write in a memo and sent it out, and this was forwarded by a concerned citizen to the press. In a memo, we could not anticipate or prevent extreme promiscuous behavior such as the medication taking on an urban legend status that would lead adolescents to form sex-based cults centered around the use of Plan B. I think she misunderstood the phrase urban legend because she was creating one kind of right there. So that caused a lot of anger by the leftovers in the FDA who had been there before the Bush administration started to fill it up with religious fanatics. And if you ever want to have fun, like look up some of the people that Bush promoted to the FDA. I can't even get into it. But 2005, the assistant FDA commissioner, Susan Wood, who was a big advocate of making Plan B over the counter, resigned in protest. In 2006, after repeated citizens' petitions, after repeated applications, after repeated studies showing that the drug was safe, the FDA finally was like, fine. We'll put it behind the pharmacy counter where you have to show an ID to prove that you're 18 or over to get this drug. That didn't work out. Reports started to pour in of women being denied access by judgmental religious pharmacists. So there's this movement in the religious right to get members of their faith to become pharmacists strictly so that they can sit at pharmacy counters and not let women get birth control and give them the runaround. All these major drugstore chains have had to create policies to work around them. Either they tell them they have to give the drug or they have to make another pharmacist do it. So it's getting a little bit better, but this was kind of some of the like ground tactics that the religious right tries to use to prevent women from getting contraception. Men have also would find that they would go to pharmacy counters. I call it the good boyfriend problem. They show up, they want to buy Plan B for their girlfriend or their wife, and instead the pharmacist thinks they're some kind of pervert and won't let them have the drug, because only perverts would buy lady stuff, I guess. So Obama won, right? And we thought things would get better. Obama basically said that he would put science first in his policy making, and I would argue that by and large he has. This is probably the biggest exception to the rule, though. In 2009, the FDA lowered the age to 17 under court order. So now if you're 17 or older, you can go up to a counter and get it. In 2011, and this was one of the most amazing things that has ever happened to me in my years as a reproductive rights journalist, the FDA came out and said they're going to let Plan B be sold over the counter without any age restrictions because of the manufacturer had created new research showing that girls as young as like 12 or so can read the instructions and follow them. And this is maddening that they had to show this research because the instructions are literally put the pill in your mouth, swallow. It's super easy. There's only one pill. And the HHS secretary, Kathleen Sebelius, then announced that they were doing something completely unprecedented in the HHS history, which is they overrode the FDA's decision and said no. And her excuse, which was she claimed was a secular one, saying that they hadn't proved that 11-year-olds knew how to take the drug, was transparently awful. The real reason, I think, here that there was concern about it was that the Obama administration was afraid that people's misunderstanding of how Plan B works was going to create this entire furor. So before I go further, I want to explain very carefully how this drug works. It is not an abortion. It doesn't even kill fertilized eggs. Research, what it does is it basically prevents ovulation. They've even done research showing that if you've ovulated and you take it, it will not, and a fertilized egg is in there, it won't do anything to it. Your post-pregnancy rate, if you take Plan B, if you've already got a fertilized egg in you, is exactly the same as if you didn't take it. It's safe, and they've even done research showing it doesn't affect sexual decision-making in case anybody's afraid of that. But I think what Obama was up against was an incredibly motivated religious right that was dying to run a bunch of ads that said, Obama gave abortion pills to 10-year-olds. And they have confused the issue. They have spent years and years and years feeding the public with propaganda and lies about how this drug works. So, I think a huge percentage of the country has no idea exactly what the hell this drug is. And, Obama was kind of making, a realpolitik decision, and I disagreed with it, but at least at the time, I feel like it was understandable to this extent that when you're going up against a religious right, you really don't want to just hand them a loaded gun, However, he's continued to fight it now that he's won re-election. The rationale seems to be, well, we don't want anybody to think that our decision-making was political, so we're going to continue to fight this with our bullshit secular excuses, even though it was clearly a political decision. This is the judge that has been ruling on the case over and over again, and I don't know if you guys have been following the news, but basically now he's told the Obama administration that they have to make it over the counter without any age restrictions, like now. No stays, no delays, no, if they continue to appeal it, that's fine, but they can't keep it behind the pharmacy counters, and they can't require ID anymore for it. The FDA has sort of given a little, and they've lowered the age to 15, but still it's like pulling teeth. So these are some of the quotes from his decisions. I think that you might appreciate them. This is what happens when you're a judge and you've been going up against people making pseudoscience and bad faith arguments over and over again. He was a little bit mad. Apparently he was rapping the podium when he was laying down this decision. So I wanted to kind of go over this because what I want to say is this entire debate has been about one side being motivated by religious irrational fears of female sexuality that conflict again with over and over. Drug has been researched to the nth degree. And feminists have been coming at this debate with more studies and more studies and more research and more research. And every time this battle goes another round, we get our way a little bit more. We've had the age lowered. Now it's down to 15 with an ID. It'll probably soon be completely over the counter without any restrictions. It took us over a decade, but we won by bringing the fight with research. So, I'm going to wind this up because I know a lot of people ask me to say a quick word about anti-feminist skeptics. I've had them come at me on Twitter. I asked them all the same question, like, what are your specific complaints? I've never gotten anything that like could actually be tied to a specific person. It's almost exclusively straw women. I hope my speech here has driven home how important it is to think of feminism and skepticism and secular humanism as aligned movements that are working in conjunction, as well as the panel before and many of the speakers after. And just to keep in mind that as long as we hold tight, as long as we fight, we can make skepticism better, we can make it more useful, we can have a broader vision of science being used to make people's lives better. So with that, I want to show you those ducks and and this GIF and open it up to questions.